I think actually,
Oh no, what's going on here now?
I'm slightly worried that we've got a matching lampshade for you.
At least it's an en vogue color. It's en vogue then, isn't it? If Dexter's selling it, I've got the colorings. I'm a follower of fashion here.
Yeah, that would be it. Not something in the clearance. No.
This wasn't in the clearance. This shirt was 13 Eka.
I'm not talking about the shirt.
Oh. The lampshade was.
No, not talking about lampshade.
Hmm.
Wait.
It's coming. The processing. I can feel it. Don't need Doris Stokes to see that one coming, do you?
I'm just sitting here drinking my coffee.
Why does your coffee bottle say Smirnoff on it?
There's no alcohol involved here tonight yet. It's too early.
The Whoppers are coming thick and fast tonight, aren't they?
Oh!
Right.
It's only bloody 20 to 7. It's way too early yet for a drink.
Next time, Jason, I see you with a drink before 20 to 7, I shall feed that back to you.
Oh, the trouble is, though, you're likely to, aren't you? That's the real.
No, not likely to. I definitely will. Hello and welcome to Talking About. We are back talking about season 13, and this is going to be 3 parts. Don't worry that we're going to be cancelled at the end of this run, because this is our first run season for Classic Who. We're not going to be cancelled. We're going to ditch Jason, because, but we will be continuing. So anyway, I'm Paul or P-Bal, and I'm joined today by...
Hello, I'm James.
And hello, I'm Jason. And they're not getting rid of me that easily.
Literally, he's been recast. It's like he's gone.
Who have you recast me with then? That's the interesting thing.
The lampshade.
Oh no! Now I don't believe you've recast me with a lampshade here at all. I do not believe this one little bit. It could not be more entertaining than I.
Oh, I've been watching the Terror of the Zygons today. It's very good. It's a Doctor Who script and it's in 4 parts with Tom Baker. Wow, that's incisive.
I've got one word for you. Rude. I mean, I cannot believe you recast me there. It's on Vogue colours. I keep saying it's on Vogue.
Lovely. So anyway, 6 stories to go this season. We are starting with Terror of the Zygons. That's actually almost like a Zygon-y sucker finger thing, isn't it?
It was.
Yeah. I have to start worrying if I shimmer and turn into one. But here's the excitement. I've got something. It's about 8 inches and it's hard, and I just can't wait to show it you. It's been seen by a lot of people in the area. It has been borrowed a lot. It's been well thumbed, but it's now mine. It is.
Oh, do you know what? I am definitely having hardback envy here. That is one of the first library books I borrowed. It's probably not that one, but I borrowed Loch Ness Monster in hardback from the library many, many years ago.
Well, I mean, in truthfulness, I mean, this has come from
the library.
This has come from Coventry Library. So if anyone in the Coventry area ever read this was the one.
Beautiful cover.
It was £3.95 on original which would have been like £1,000 in the ancient days, wouldn't it? Probably, wasn't it, Jason?
It was quite expensive, though. I wish I'd spent £3.95 on it back in the day, because it would have actually been a much better investment than my pension currently.
Well, you've been claiming your pension for long enough. You've got value out of it, love. All that free travel. What are you complaining about?
Can I just quote? I am not at pensionable age yet.
Yet.
I think when the fact checkers come through for this, that's going to be the first thing that's flagged. £3 I paid for that. That was an absolute steal, wasn't it? It was a steal. I didn't steal it, but it was a steal. Right.
That's
who
gonna be
has
worth
an
an awful lot
introduction?
more money than that now, isn't it? That's big money, isn't it?
Maybe $1 million, maybe less. So when Doctor Who is summoned to the shores of Loch Ness, no, I can't even read. That is literally not what the words say. It's just my bad eyesight. It says, "Why is Doctor Who suddenly summoned to the shores of Loch Ness?" Who wants to finish the intro then?
Go on, Jason.
I was going to let you do it, James, but I'm quite happy to finish it off.
Where's the get the lampshade back?
I'm desperately trying to search for. No, I can't. I'm not going to finish it off. I am going to give you my own unique start to this story. And in fact, I'm going to start just starting with the season as a whole, actually, because I think I've said a couple of times that my very first Doctor Who memory was Planet of the Spiders, John Pertwee. And I think Tom's first season was the first season I would have watched through, but wouldn't really have taken an awful lot of it in. And I think this is why I think this season's probably the reason why I'm such a Hinchcliffe fan, because this is probably the first season of Doctor Who that I would have sat and religiously watched week after week after week after week. And it was quite a scary one, wasn't it, this one? And do you know what? This is a season that I think is really one of the pinnacles of classic Doctor Who. And we start with, a fantastic story, held over, I think, from the previous season, but gives us the start of 13, sees the Doctor and Sarah and Harry landing back on Earth, summoned back by the Brigadier, in what is technically the last but one unit story, I suppose. And wow, we are treated, I think, to the introduction of a very classic Doctor Who monster. The design of these things, just amazing. And I think the story's full of suspense. It's got an awful lot going on. There's some really spooky bits with the nurse. Pretend, and I think this is the thing when you've got monsters that can pretend to be or can meld in with their surroundings by sort of morphing into humans or whatever it might be. You're never quite sure who the enemy is. Some great set pieces in this, great direction, great way to start a season.
When you say it's technically the last but one unit story, is that excluding the Android Invasion, the Seeds of Doom, and Battlefield and all the new series ones?
Well, I look at the unit story from a Seeds of Doom perspective, and you don't get any of what I would call your unit regulars there.
Are unit in it?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
But they're not regulars.
So is Colony in Space a unit story then? Because you get Brigadier in it, who's a unit regular, but you get nobody else.
To me, it's the last but one I'm going to see for the Tom Baker years.
Ooh, that is quite early for the handbag. That is quite early. Wind him up. Just
this is very early in the season.
Off it goes.
As soon as those words left your mouth, I was like,
oh, here we go.
This is going to start.
Oh. Okay.
And we were having such a lovely review of your whole experience with Doctor Who to start with.
Well, you were. I mean, genuinely, this season is such a fondly remembered season for me. I've been waiting to get to this one all the way through, and we've got to it last of all.
Would you rather we'd have left season 20? Would you really?
No, I really wouldn't have rather we left season 20, honestly. Don't bring back bad memories for me, please.
So yes, it is hung over from the season, but it would have been a 6-part, wouldn't it? And it has a little bit of a slip down because Philip wasn't a fan of that malarkey, and I don't blame him. It's good, isn't it? It starts great, and it's just high on atmosphere, I think, isn't it? Terror of the Zygons. I also quite like, because having been watching it now for 20 years, I like on the DVD that they restored that opening little bit that was always missed. Well, the TARDIS landing, and there's just something about that sort of even adds to it. The woods and all, So it always felt a little bit abrupt that they just sort of came ambling out of a hedge, didn't they? And it's a bit kind of like, is this how we do this? But Douglas obviously liked the idea of invisible TARDISes, isn't he? Because that's in the Invasion as well, isn't it? It lands and comes back.
Yeah, it goes back to Earth, the proper Earth, doesn't it?
So, what do other people like about Doctor Who and the Terror of the Zygons?
I would echo some of the things that Jason has said. Not all of it. Just the
it would be a
correct
shame because I wouldn't want you to agree fully with me.
do you know what? You're right in the fact that this season is where it really hits its stride, and there's, we talk about seasons having highlights, and when we were looking at some of these stories, it's really difficult because some of them really are exceptionally good, and others are still good. But you're like, how do I rank that in comparison to some other seasons where you might have had sort of average stories all the way along? But I love how you start to really see the horror elements. You start to see the sort of, the darker side of it. You mentioned about the nurse Sister Lamont, is it, who is a really sort of chilling character. When she turns against Harry, that you've got essentially like a sort of invasion of the body snatchers. Sort of, people are being replaced with replicas in this little town, and it's just so it's really gothic in that respect, and I did so many elements of it that I do genuinely like. The Zygons are a great addition to the Doctor Who, Hall of Monsters, and it's a shame that they weren't necessarily picked up. I know more recently that they have been, but it would have been good to see them have come back at some point. More in classic Who, but I think there's lots of things in this that I really enjoy. Plus you have all these sort of outdoor shots in Bonnie, Scotland, or is that West Sussex? Because it's actually filmed not that far down the road from me, in parts of Littlehampton and Climping Beach, which, again, it looks beautiful. Might have just spoilt it there, but it's very good.
It's funny because the Zygons are sort of screaming for a comeback because of how they look and how they sound and all that sort of stuff. And it sort of takes David Tennant saying, "They're my favourites, can we have them back before they can come back?" But they don't come back terribly well, I don't think. I mean, this is a separate discussion to have another day, maybe. But I do feel that sort of little bit of sadness that actually the progressive TV versions haven't been great. I think there's there's a novel, there's a Steve Cole, I think, Sting of the Zygons, which is actually really good. And that's a 10th Doctor Martha story. That sort of got echoes of this, as I recall from reading it 15 years ago. It's a bit more in keeping with this, I think. But the stuff that sort of followed after that, they've sort of lost their pull on it. And I think they're very good in this. I think it's a shame that the iterations that followed aren't quite as good.
I think you always get that. Sadly, you see that quite a lot in more recent Doctor Who, where you get more and more of the aliens, and it has less of an impact. I think here, because you've got a small amount of them that have survived, the crash landing, they're trying to keep themselves hidden. Whereas I think in the more modern version, there's loads of them that there's lots of them already on Earth, and so I don't think they have such an impact from that sort of scare point of view, or also the way that they're used. In this, you see that slow trickle as they slowly start to influence what's going on around. They slowly start taking over more and more people. The fact that they gas everybody so they can move the giant, the Loch Ness monster. It's not, but the Saracen, is it, that they move it when everybody's asleep through knockout gas. If you were doing a bigger version of this story, you wouldn't be able to do those little elements, I don't think.
And I think with this alien, the Zygons in particular, the design of them is so unique as well, isn't it? Because it's quite obvious, in some of the monsters that we get, that they are sort of, people dressed up in there. But the form of the costume and the whole arching at the back and the head, it's just so well designed. And I think it was a real it was an odd decision, but I think it worked to put the actors inside the Zygons who were playing the human counterparts as well. And it kind of messes with you a little bit that they've done that, because normally you wouldn't have the lead guest star hidden away underneath a mask, ideally in a story. But it just adds to the undertone of the menace of the Zygons. And the ship design. I mean, again, we're at a peak here, I think, in Doctor Who, where some of the design work that we see throughout this season will be, is epic. I mean, what they were trying to do on small scale budgets is amazing. And I think the costume of the Zygon and the Zygons the Zygons interior of their ship, so well realized in this story.
Because James Atchison, bless him, is a great Oscar winner. Obviously, it's kind of like he does monsters well, doesn't he? Sometimes, it's like he gets it. So the look is great, and obviously then the production design levels up with that. The Zygons look like they're sort of part of their ship and all that. The other thing I think, before we do the guest cast, I think the regular cast, Ian, I think Harry does feel very much at this point that possibly he's done as far as he can go before we finish do 100 versions of him with someone else playing the part. But it does feel like it sort of hit the point now where that they don't feel that they particularly need him in there somehow. He's basically taken the old school thing of being knocked out and caught and knocked out, and but within that, I think you do get demonstrations of how good an actor Ian was, in that when he does become the killer Zygon, there's an absolute shift in the sort of buffoony kind of performance he gives Harry to sort of Zygon possessed thing. And also, Liz is an absolute powerhouse at this point. She's storming through this, isn't she? And she's playful, and she has a sort of almost childlike playfulness, but without being childish. It's a playful thing that's actually quite endearing, but it switches, doesn't it? Like the sort of mockery of the Angus Lenny, she's mocking him because he's doing his Hawkeye stories, and then she switches into, okay, no, let's be serious. But there's lovely, and you can see the humour, because obviously Tom and Liz are sort of bouncing off each other, which, like, no point having secrets in, because the landlord here's got second sight, It's just it's clever, and it's I suppose it's the wit that increases sort of with Tom, the comedy wit, but possibly expands beyond the sprinkling that you're getting here when it becomes a bit more all-encompassing, shall we say?
No, he's definitely he's got one season under his belt, and the one-liners, they're one-liners at this stage. I think you're right. He's not in total control of directorial decisions, and although he's starting to really find his feet, there's just they're peppered through this season. Those sort of one-liners where he looks to camera and delivers a really punchy line, and it works. But this is really, if you like, again, there's so many elements that come together in season 13, and the relationship between Tom and Liz, it's developed so much more than the relationship she had with John. And obviously, they gelled well together, and we've reviewed season 12, and they've gelled well together in that season. But this is the one where you get to see them travel together for the first time on their own, and it really cements. And strange, isn't it? Because they clearly had run out of ideas for Harry, and in some respects, I think we might have said this in season 12. Harry was an odd companion cast, really. And I think only done because they thought that the Doctor was going to be potentially an older character at the time when they were looking around to cast the fourth Doctor. So in some respects, Harry was used fairly sparingly through season 12, but I think it was the right time for the change here to take it back down to just the Doctor and Sarah, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I thought what's interesting. Oh, sorry, I took a say on the Doctor front. There is that the thing that sort of struck me about Tom's performance is he's got a sort of an attack and almost an anger in some of his deliveries that I thought was quite reminiscent of how Capaldi does it later on. Because I know Capaldi obviously was a fan during the latter part of the Pertwee, all that sort of stuff. But you can definitely see the influences when he suddenly just jars into a sort of. And he's not aggressive. He's not unpleasant. But there's a sort of an underlying sort of alien sort of anger. Is that another word? But you wouldn't mess, and he's in total control, and that's incredible. He's very powerful on screen, even when he's being very placid.
He's very good at, as soon as he walks into a scene, of like you say, taking control of it, but also of being noticed. You're right. He's quite sort of abrupt, and then will mellow. So he'll come in and go, "What's going on?" And then he sort of eases into it. But I just go back to your point. I think here we have, really we're starting to get into the best part of Tom and Liz, because they just work so well together. They just spark off each other. She is still feisty, independent. There's still that reporter part of her as well, where she's inquisitive. She is, like you say, P-Bal, she's like really sort of energetic. She's really excited. She wants to go and find out what's going on. He just goes, "All right then, be careful," and she's off. While he gets on and does his thing. So I think at this point you're right. There is poor Harry is kind of squeezed out of the way. It's not. They don't really even bother to find a storyline for him. He's just there, which is sad, but I guess it's just the way that the relationship between the characters developed.
Also, look at bits in the castle with Liz where she asks the ladder, "Why do I get all the desk jobs?" She asks the ladder, and the caber gives her that sort of impassive kind of look, and she's like, it's all that. It's just like, it's great though, and I think you can only do that if you're absolutely relaxed with it all, and it's something you wouldn't. I mean, there's no way. I'm going to be wrong now. Someone will say, "Well, actually, in the camera script, it says that Liz does this," but it feels very much that something wasn't scripted originally or was developed that she would have reacted like that and all that. It's kind of.
You do feel like they're little bits of business that they have stuck in there, that they've worked out between themselves during rehearsal, because again, I think both of them are so at ease in the roles at this point and sparking so well off each other. You're right. I don't think it would be camera scripted to that extent, because again, would the writers have known to pull out those idiosyncrasies in their characters?
And there's a bit, isn't there, when they're on and they're dropping the missiles the incendiaries, whatever we're calling them, into the loch, and it cuts the Zygon ship, and Doctor goes, "That'll be my friend the Brigadier." It's kind of it's a great sort of joke. It's a joke if you get that it's a joke, and it's it's sort of on those levels where it doesn't intrude, but it's actually it works for the adults and the kids. It's quite a nice shift on it. That's what he says anyway. Yeah. They don't agree. They don't agree.
No, I'm agreeing. I don't disagree. This I'll keep saying this throughout this season. Everything is working beautifully. It's working perfectly, note perfect through this season, and there's very little wrong footing as we run through it.
There is.
No, I go for it.
I was going to say you're talking about the ad-libbing bit and sort of the fact that they were sort of quipping with each other. The scene where Nick Courtney's on the phone, he mentions a female prime minister, but actually that was filmed before. It was something that he ad-libbed because he thought it was going to be the Liberal Democrat. Is it Shirley
Temple?
Ballast? Shirley, is it Shirley Williams? He thought that there was going to be a female prime minister, but not Margaret Thatcher, because she'd only just become leader of the Tory party at that point. She wasn't prime minister. So just little things like that they got away with.
I don't know how you can follow that fact.
Well, I was going to say, casting wise, Angus Lenny has a bit of a rum do, I think, with the Ice Warriors, but it's a beautifully little tragic part, isn't it? In this, it's such a sort of sweet little thing, isn't he? And then it's quite brutal the way he's killed off in it. And this was my sort of my excitement during the Queen's funeral. The same music, Flowers of the Forest, the Lament for the Dead, the bagpipes, that was played for the Queen's funeral.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Big fans of Doctor Who at Buck Palace, and they were like, let's get those bagpipes from Terror of the Zygons in. Ish. But yes. Oh, the music. I adore Jeffrey Burton's music. It's because as a little weenie that grew up on the Chronicles of Narnia, for which he also did the incidental music, there's something I think probably instilled in me that I just love. It's a sort of romantic thing. It's a complete different style to Dudley, isn't it? It's a bit more full-bodied and a bit more. I don't know. I'm not a technical musical person, I listen to Spice Girls, but it feels a lot more romantic and a lot more. I like his melodies, a bit more melodious, maybe.
Yeah, it's very atmospheric as well. I know we've had on previous reviews comments about soundtrack and incidental music and how some of it doesn't necessarily work, but it does, and it adds to the overall feeling of the show.
That's the fringe benefits of Douglas and Dudley having a fallout. So it's true, every word of it's true. Anyway, Lilias Walker, incredible in this as well. We went we had lunch with Lilias once. Lilias and Peter Vaughan was Lilias's husband, obviously. And we went and had lunch and all that sort of stuff, and she was signing it. And she's like, what's happening in this picture? And I was like, we've just tried to cave in a soldier's skull with a rock. She went, just carried on. But it's funny, you said, oh, you were one of only two women in the cast. She was like, I was the only woman in the cast. Like, no, Liz was in it. She was a girl. I was much older than her. I was the only woman.
There's something really otherworldly about her performance. She looks like she has literally been taken out of a Hammer horror film and put into this story. Just even the look when she's running through the woods and she's got the sort of, they shoot the Zygon and she's got the blood trickling down her arm, and you genuinely don't know what she's going to do next, because she just looks like she's I know she was about to sort of knock the guy out with a rock, but she looks like she could turn at any moment into this killer. She's got the look on her eyes as well.
It's the eyes. Exactly what I was just going to say. It's the eyes, and she's just got that. She's playing the menace, but it's just an evil, and it's quite scary, and it lives with you a little, doesn't it? Because I'd be quite scared to probably have. I've never met her myself, so she's probably very nice when you had lunch with her, but you just think, wow, I'm not. She's too scary.
She didn't get a rock out. It has to be said.
Would you like some tea?
It's like what? And then down. No, yeah, it's but she does again with that is it. It's the mark of being able to act. Is that when she's released from the machine and she's regular Sister Lamont, it's actually she does the warm,
lovely,
nice thing, doesn't she? And it's a great shift. But just the stillness, I think, of her performance elsewhere in the eye, it is, you wouldn't have wanted to be in her sick bay either way, would you? In that kind of.
No, that sick bay was not very inviting at all.
And John Wood, amazing, and he does a great turn on both. Because again, we have discussed previously the thing of acting under and he does it. He does a great job under the Broton makeup, doesn't he, as well? Which is to his credit, because I think it's quite easy to look at a costume like that and think, well, let's ramp this up a little bit, and it's not.
Because you get that shot of him in the first episode when he's in full Zygon, and it's a close-up, and you can see the eyes, and you can tell that you can at that point tell that it's him, but he's acting out of the costume, and the eyes, again, there's something about eyes in this story, but when you see the human eyes in the Zygon costume, there's something that makes it, I think, quite it just makes it quite scary.
I know there's been reports of Nick not being terribly at ease during this because he thought it was sort of the end for the Brigadier and all that sort of stuff. But I would sort of err of saying he does seem a little bit more reserved than he is normally. Maybe he's slightly less certain. He's great. I'm not saying he doesn't give a fantastic point, but I think it's slightly lowered, isn't it? It's like I do wonder whether there's a little bit of a. I can see this isn't going to be something I'm back for with any great regularity, because you can just see it's Tom and Liz now. That's the zeitgeist.
Didn't he say, like in interviews, that his relationship with Tom had hit a bit of a low by this point as well? I think I read, but whether that's true or not. I mean, he did talk about his character being killed off in this story, but it was decided that they didn't want to go down that road. But this would be the last time we see him until Mordrin Undead, I think.
Yeah, because he wasn't actually free for Seeds of Doom. It wasn't that he didn't want to do it. He was in the West End, so I think he was actually acting rather than outright saying he wasn't going to do it. It's funny because actually you can see that John Levine and Tom are not good friends. You can absolutely see him.
Oh, exactly what I was just about to say. I've heard the stories, but I'm rewatching it. Actually, sat and took time to have a look at the chemistry on screen during this story, and it's pretty frosty. And John's been quite outspoken, I think, and Tom, to be fair, in both their own sides as to what that relationship was like. But yeah, absolutely no chemistry on screen whatsoever.
And spoilers, he comes back for another go.
He comes back. And yeah, the funny thing is, actually, I would say this is probably one of the best stories for John Levine, because I think Douglas knows how to handle him, and he shoots well. And all those shots where they're Zygon hunting are really beautifully done. And I think you get some very nice pieces in this story. But yeah, I think you can see Mr. Levine and Mr. Baker and not heading down the pub afterwards for a pint.
But I think this is the thing, isn't it, with the unit story to a degree, because it was born out of necessity back in the late 60s, because they were looking for some sort of new format for the John Pertwee years, and it worked so well. I mean, there's nothing you can say about the unit relationship with the Third Doctor throughout those stories, but it's clear that Philip and Tom, to a degree, I think, want this to go in a different direction. Now we're in the Fourth Doctor era, and it probably was time to rest unit at this stage, even though I think they would have perhaps liked to have brought them back more occasionally. But I don't think this was the wrong time to do this, and I think it allowed Philip and the production team to do what they needed to do, and I think we get a change of direction that suits the series, particularly for the next two seasons, without having to draw too far back into, unit are in a couple more stories, as you've said, but I'm glad the decision was taken at this stage, I think, to drop unit out, because it was the right time.
Yeah, the Fourth Doctor doesn't particularly work well with that situation. Because I suppose the Third Doctor is a slight anti-authority figure, but he sort of he's also a bit James Bondy, and there's a sort of vibe that you could imagine him having an office there, but disapproving of it, but knowing to use it. Whereas the fourth, there isn't. He doesn't. There's just no. You couldn't imagine him saying, "Oh, how can I help unit say?" Or can I? It's like it's not his. You know, they just don't fit together. So you can see that it's got to go.
Because the Doctor's annoyed at the start of the story. You better have a good reason for bringing me back to Earth. You know, he doesn't want to be brought back to solve Earth's latest problem. You know, he is a happy explorer, and I think that's where, you know, the good thing for us is the rest of the next couple of seasons go, because, you know, they are out there, they are exploring, and they are getting into non-Earthbound scrapes that rely on unit and, you know, villain of the week land, you know, in trying to invade Earth.
But they'd still do the alien planet Earth, you know, or not necessarily. I know we talked at the end of Pertwee's, the last Pertwee one we reviewed, where they were doing chopping and changing between Earth and an alien planet. There is still Earthbound stories here, but they just don't involve unit as much as the you know, the Pertwee ones. You would be back with unit as a mainstay, whereas this is unit might be involved, but it's more about them coming back to Earth.
It's actually spun on its head though slightly, because, you know, the Doctor might look out. He might try to look up the Brigadier to get a bit of idea of what's going on, as he does in later stories in this season. You know, he walks down the corridor and sees the Brigadier's name on the door or something like that. He's happening to seek it rather than that be part of the overall story, where he is relying entirely on unit and unit are relying entirely on him.
Yeah. And to be honest, a lot of them are unit waiting for an invasion to happen, and then the invasion happening, and it's sort of not quite, because obviously the android invasion, it's sort of already happened, and then he comes with them for the invasion and all that. So it is flipped a little bit round on how it would have been. But well, there's a lot of unit stories. I think that's the thing, isn't it, with the show? You've got to chop and change. You can't keep it, can you? You can't keep going the same way. That's sort of how it rolls with the companion stuff, isn't it? 'Cause, I mean, you know, we've got this full season with Liz, but then Philip's like, you know, I kind of want to try my own assistant here, you know. And when were you thinking of going? And it's like, all right, subtle hint there. Thanks for that. I'll give it 2 more and then we'll go. But you know, you've got to make your mark, haven't you? I think that's the joy and the success, in my opinion, of Doctor Who is when the producers are coming in. They are trying something new. They're trying something fresh, and I think things only stagnate if you try and pull things from the past to make your show new, and it doesn't work that way. So you can't sort of make another run of unit stories because you've done that. You've got to keep reinventing. You've got to keep changing it. I mean, let's say that happen now, but
that's the beauty of bringing the new producer in, isn't it? I mean, you know, Philip inherited an awful lot of season 12, if I recall correctly. So this is really the first time that he can properly put his stamp onto the series. And I think he does so respectfully, but does stamp it absolutely in his own way that he wants it to go. And he isn't going to get dragged down by the history of the show or anything like that. He's going to try and get out there and do his own thing. Because actually, if you think about this season, he's not drawing heavily from the past in any way. So that's him saying, I am putting my stamp on it here. And his stamp was that sort of, whether they fell into it accidentally or not, it was that gothic horror kind of approach that in some respects made the show, it's a show for children, but it grew the show up a little bit. It became something completely different as a result of it.
It did. And there's no Cybermen or Daleks in this season, you know, or Master, I think, as well. So, you know, you've got where have we heard those 3 recently?
I was going to say, there's a particular producer at the moment that could have learned from that.
But you've got, you know, the mainstays, if you like, are, you know, certainly over recent years, that are not in this season. And you know, and we just said, Zygons, first time out, brilliant. That's the way you land a brand new alien, into the Doctor Who canon, if you like. And each one this season is different. It's it might not necessarily be a brand new idea, but it's done in a way that is slightly fresher, slightly different perspective, not relying on a whole load of Doctor Who history.
I think actually sort of the season 12 thing is a mark of how clever Barry was, in that he knew John had done it for 5 years and that John going was a big upheaval. And so there are lots of safety barriers there, aren't there? So you've got Harry as the potential if Doctor Who can't run around and do the action. So you've got that option covered. And you've got a giant robot like King Kong. You've got he's ticking boxes of publicities almost, isn't it? And you've got the Daleks, the Cybermen, Santaris. It's all things that viewers would find familiar and like from previous runs, whilst having your new Doctor. So it's just a safety blanket there, rather than saying forget the past. They're little safety cushions, which progressively, because Tom is so good, he's so good straight away. I mean, he's there within about 5 minutes of it. He doesn't take his time. He's there. You realise that you don't need those. You don't need to say, well, shall we have another adventure on Peladon? It's like you don't need it. You can go to these places and do exciting things with them. I suppose Terror of the Zygon slightly does feel like it's the end of the last season. I know it was meant to be, but it does feel, because it's that kind of the bookend of, and the Loch Ness Monster, and then that's your kind of like, and we've done all these sort of very safe kind of coverage for the fourth Doctor's launch, and then it's the next story, which, I mean, it depends how you take the next story, because obviously pyramids and planets swapped around in broadcast from production, but that then feels like that's the launch. Philip was very much that's it. Those are the launch, because he'd moved away from everything he'd inherited. This is the end of that. Which isn't to say what he's inherited is bad, because Barry was very clever. He knew the show inside out. But this is sort of very much the end of clearing out the china from the last tea set.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's the watershed, isn't it? Of here comes the new stuff.
So how about the elephant in the room then? We have not discussed the Scarrison.
Do you know? We have already reviewed Invasion of the Dinosaurs. We talk about rubber models and some pretty weird and wacky creatures. Do you know, in the context of the story, I don't actually mind it too much. I think it's not. I think they took quite wisely the decision not to have it on camera. Just to. I think less is more. Where you just show a tooth or the occasional footprint or whatever else. I think if you're not 100% with the model, it's like, yeah, use it. So there's an imposed, an implied creature rather than here it is. But I think it's. I don't have any problems with that.
Kind of wish they'd done that though, James. I think because even though they cut back on the amount of time that you saw the model work, it was still there quite a bit. It was ambitious, and they were trying something different to try and achieve an effect that they'd not done very well in previous attempts. Again, anytime you've used sort of dinosaurs or prehistoric creatures of that sort, it's just never really worked. Even if you go back to the Silurians, it didn't really work then either. They tried it. It's not Ray Harryhausen by any stretch of the imagination. But what I think it is it's what they achieved on the budget that they achieved. And I don't feel that it doesn't distract me out of the narrative of the story, because I think the story's strong enough. Just possibly should have seen a little less of it on screen, maybe.
Essentially a camp old dinosaur with stilted movement that looks a bit cheap. Basically Jason.
I'm sorry, that's rude. That is rude.
Jason is our own Scarrison. We should see him less, because he's more effective when you only get little bits.
I am speechless.
People calling for him to be cut out altogether or re-CGI'd. I mean, it hits. It's chilling.
You've recast me apparently, so I mean, you know.
We've got the Scarrison. He's been retired for 50 years, but he's coming back. I think it's it gets away with it from the main part, doesn't it? I think the only bit where you slightly feel a bit kind of is the end shot where it comes out the River Thames and it's doing all that, and it's a bit kind of that's when it looks a little bit kind of like, oh, this hasn't quite paid off. I mean, other than the notion of how it got from Loch Ness, because it's meant to be, and I can't help thinking if it had chugged down some other rivers, it would have been a little bit too big for the. I'm not sure that entirely all works, but
no. And then it goes back, and then it goes back. It goes back to the only home it's ever known. It goes back to Loch Ness. It's like, okay.
It goes out to hang with the Borad, who is also the Loch Ness monster.
Ah.
That's not happened yet, so that's not his fault.
They'd clearly run a little bit short on budget by the time they got to the end of the story, though, because in all honesty, the building that they're purporting to be stood on the balcony of, the conference there, it's a little bit of a cheap corridor set, that one, isn't it?
Oh, and that's another one of the great jokes, isn't it? When the Doctor tries the light switch, it doesn't come. He says no power, and Liz goes, "Oh, maybe someone should tell the Energy Commission." And it's oh, yeah, oh,
so it's topical too.
Well, we got the Scarrison attacking London. Jason, can you not attack London, please?
I'll remember that the next time I go to London.
To be fair, when you're at the BFI, do you lurch out the Thames like that? Where's my craft ale? Where's my craft ale? With a floppy paw going for the pint glass.
Yes, it could well be perceived that I am attacking London at that point. Yes,
it's just looking for the nearest open bar. That's all. It's just like,
it's like, where's the Weatherspoons? Where's the Weatherspoons?
I can't keep saying rude, but that's rude.
Facts is facts, as I think you say. Do we have any exotic facts on Doctor Who and Terror of the Zygons?
Not massively, because we covered most of them as we've been going through. This was Douglas's return, wasn't it? Because he didn't have a heart attack, or he was ill after Inferno. So this is the first time he'd been back for about 5 years. Apart from that, no, we've covered everything else as we've gone through.
Well, I can't think of anything else exotic I want to add to this. Other than that, my first time I watched this was on a very crackly UK Gold recording, and because it was the omnibus edition, you had ad breaks at the end of each episode, then an ad break halfway through episode 4. So whenever they go, right, let's move out, I always expect there to be an ad break there, because that's how it always fast forward that as a kid. Which isn't a fact, but it's my anecdote, and good to share. The Scarrison looks like he's ready to go back under the water. What's wrong with him?
Are you referring to me again?
Yes, dear. Yes.
Oh, well, it's nice to have a new nickname, isn't it?
It's the floppy. He goes to get the locator off the Doctor, and he leans in with that floppy claw. It's Jason after a pint in a pub. I am telling you.
Good invite for people to buy me a drink if they ever see me. Then,
if you're going to buy him, just buy him, and don't offer to buy his drinks, because that's like Liz Truss levels of borrowing you'll need.
I'm saying nothing here at all.
Anyway,
I say something to say nothing, so that's not good, is it?
Anyway, do we have any scores we can share, please? Rude. That's rude. Oh, that's quite an opinionated lampshade, isn't it? Can't wait to hear what they've got to say about the new series.
Oh, well, I'm going to really be tuning in to follow this new series thing with the lampshade. That will be amazing.
Who would like to give their score for Doctor Who and the Loch Ness Monster?
Well, I'm more than happy to make a start. Because then I can't be accused of being 0.5 above or below James when I get to the end of the score, so I can set the
It's like the rhyme of Rassilon. Whatever Jason will score, we half 0.5 below between. Oh, fine, whatever.
Okay,
go on, Jason.
Let's go for it then. So, start of season 13 gets off to an absolute flyer. It's just brilliant, and I think, you know, made all the more brilliant by the fantastic costume design for the Zygons. You've got a great guest list playing in the show. Tom and Liz on song. Always nice to have the unit boys there, although not many of them, because it's obviously a little bit shorter group at this point. But, you know, you've got John Levine, you've got Nick Courtney, and you know what? It just feels like a little bit of an end of an era, but the beginning of, I think, what will be a really strong era under Philip. I mean, I'm going to ignore that they're pulling faces at me at the other end of this recording and carry on. I think, you know, I can forgive the Scarrison because, you know, they don't get it right all the time, but you can forgive it because actually the story in itself is brilliant, and the dark undertones and, you know, the way some of the scenes are played in this, brilliant. So do you know what? We're going to get off to a bit of a flyer here on the scores, and I'm going to start us off with Terror of the Zygons getting a very good, solid 8.5 from me.
Oh. See, if it wasn't perfect, it would have got a 10. Sorry.
Not once did I use the word script, and not once did I use the word perfect in that review.
It's not perfect, but to me it's a 12. Can I give it a 12?
I gotta say, I do echo a lot of what you just said. I think that it's just so good to watch, and just the dynamic particularly between Tom and Liz, but also the story, the Zygons, the darker tone, this, you know, veering towards the sort of horror aspect, which I love. So yeah, I also scored this quite highly, and shockingly, I went 0.5 higher than Jason. So let it be known that I scored this a 9.
A 9. See? We're excited, folks.
Yeah.
This is no season 20.
Yeah, the one scene we didn't mention that I do also, again, because it's very graphic and it's very horror, is in the barn with the pitchfork where you try to kill
yes.
that. And I compounded by the fact that then the Zygon spears itself and does that death throw while it's sort of
wheel. Yeah.
It's quite something. Yeah, I actually, you know, in the proper sense of the word, not the Jason sense of the word, I probably adore Terror of the Zygons. I think the Scarrison just came towards us there. I can't see it.
Oh! It's there on video. I've been caught. I should be asking for an edit.
We'll slow it down so you get the full stop motion. I think Terror of the Zygons is my second favourite Doctor Who story of all time. I mean, it's quite pitch-pulley, I think, with City of Death. But City of Death just a little bit more pretentious, probably in my sphere. So, Terror of the Zygons. It is never too early for a 10 from Shirley.
Yay!
That's just a quote. We're not talking about Jason's strange voting. I mean, that means actually giving it a 10.
It is a brilliant story.
It's a brilliant story.
But in a brilliant season, it's going to be a tough one, this one.
We're spoiled for choice this season, aren't we?
Mm.
Which means that Doctor Who and the Loch Ness Monster ends on 27.5. That's a solid start, isn't it, Jason?
Whoa, that's a solid start. No question about that whatsoever.
So now we are off into space for Planet of Evil. Oh, that scared me. That did. Scared me. That did.
You scared yourself.
Scared myself almost as much as when Jason came towards me with that motion a minute ago. I thought, I know what his many partners see in him now.
Oh, right.
Can't swipe left and right because it only goes forward. So James has lost his hat, so to speak. Does that mean he's going to tell us all about Doctor Who and the Planet of Evil?
Yeah, so I can start us off. So at the end of the last story, the Doctor and Sarah boarded the TARDIS, saying they were going to head off back to London. There was a lovely little cheap dig at Scottish people wanting to refund the rail ticket at the end of that story. However, they are 30,000 years out or something when they arrive at the edge of the known universe, Zeta Minor, with some antimatter or anti-men to deal with on this planet. So yeah, that's where we're at.
I'm not going to do the joke about Janet Fielding being the later anti-men. I'm not doing it again. I'm not doing it again. Heaven forbid.
And it's not like you, James, to be anti-men.
I'm not saying I am. I'm just saying that's what the story is. But yeah, I mean, I will continue because there's quite a lot to say. We mentioned in the first story about the starting to get the horror aspects, and so here you have a story that takes from things like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as one of its sort of references. There's also Forbidden Planet in here as well, and there are certain sort of horror elements which are sort of woven into this story, which is, on the surface of it, coming from the previous story, we had such great new alien creatures. We're essentially in this, you've got the anti-men, which are just sort of like these invisible creatures with a red outline, but they do have the ability to essentially reduce someone down to a dry old husk. Jason.
No. I'm going to say though, it is such a simple visual to get the sort of anti-creature, if you like, visualized on screen. How simple is it? But it is so effective. It's just scary in itself, isn't it?
I did slightly wonder whether production-wise was the intention maybe at some point to have actual a la Inferno, have multiple creatures actually physically there, because the bits where they burn through the bulkheads and stuff, it feels like you'd have a very visual something's burnt through and come through it, rather than Freddy Jaeger sort of multiplied with a red outline. Because I don't know, because I know they had trouble with the creature, didn't they? The big sort of whatever it's like fish thing, creature thing. They had trouble with how that looked and had to sort of treat it a little bit more. But I suppose the initial star of this is Roger Murray Leach's Jungle, isn't it? Which is
it's amazing,
beautiful. And they had pictures of it for years of, this is how you do design, because the whole thing is studio bound, but actually what rescues the look of it is the jungle sequences. I mean, when you get on the ship, it's quite standard, but on the outside, it is beautiful the way that it's done.
But I think, again, because they took the decision to go and shoot a couple of days at Ealing and build that jungle set in that environment with, you know, water and, you know, they could light it really well. They weren't restricted by some of the things that they would have been if they were fully studio bound. I'm not convinced it would have been as good if we'd only ever seen it in the multi-camera setup studio. So the fact that we could get lots of low-level lighting, reds and blues and greens and all that going on, it really adds to the atmosphere of this story. And it jars a little when you cut to studio because they can't get the lighting quite the same. But it is such an impressive set, and it really sets the tone for this story. Quite right. The spaceship set is generic, although it's done very well. Again, I think the fact that they try and do it on multiple levels for the spaceship makes it seem more impressive than it is. But it's like spaceships of its time. You know, it's a bit like the Ark in the previous season. Everything's white and everything's glass tabletops with a little bit of a computer board in the middle of it, and it looks a little bit cheap. But you know, there were budget restrictions. And, you know, they'd spent an awful lot of the budget on the jungle set here. And that's exactly how a jungle set should look.
Well, they do well with cutting the lighting in it, don't they? Because they go well for the shadowing on the ship, and they do well with the shadowing of the creature, and that's all that's really well done, I think. And it's a nice contrast to when the ship is in full power and, you know, bright lights and all that stuff. So I think it's nice that you get the levels and tones with it.
But you've got a safe pair of hands in the direction on this one again. You know, you had Douglas in the first story. You've got David Maloney in this story. And, you know, with the decisions they took around how to stage the story, I think it builds the atmosphere and the way that it's directed and the pace of it. And it helps that it's a 4-part story. But the whole pace of it is just right. And to me, you know, again, sets the tone, I think, for how visually this entire season is going to go. You know, we've had it with the Zygons and the Zygon set. You've got this now with superb jungle. It's the design of its time, and it's the design of this season, and it notes a departure, I think, in the way that the show looks. Again, it takes us on a new journey, and you know, story on story as we go through. You know, I think there's a certain design style that comes out, and this set just genuinely is beautiful.
I mean, the story itself is it's not overly complicated. It's quite a straightforward story, and I was quite surprised how I related it to the more recent 42, where they were taking stuff off the sun, and because in this they're mining this sort of ore, aren't they? These crystals, which are part of the antimatter's creature, so they can't escape. While it's on the ship, they can't get away because it sort of attracted back to them. What's his name? Sorensen starts to become an antimatter creature because of his exposure to it, you know, and whilst there is any of that on the ship can't escape from the planet. It needs to go back. And it in 42 it's similar. They're sort of mining stuff off the sun, and they realize that actually it's part of a creature and they have to give it back in order to escape. So again, it's a completely different concept to something that we've had up until this point. And I think that it's quite simplistic, but it works. And you've got, for a while, you've got the usual sort of Doctor Who thing of, oh, the Doctor and Sarah must have killed the missing crewmen, and you know, you've got that story that goes on for a little bit until they realise that actually someone died whilst they were about to be sent out. I think they were about to be ejected from the ship, weren't they? They were just like, well, it can't be them because they were literally in the chamber, so it must be something else. But I think it's done, like you say, in a really good way, and again, quite a sort of darker turn to these things. And then, you know, and it's quite a brutal way that these people are killed off.
it's very graphic horror. There were quite a few bits where I was like, this is quite something for the kiddos. This is the corpses, the dehydrated corpses all look horrific, don't they? There's lots of screaming in terror and agonizing death, and it's quite horrific. Freddie Yeager, I think, is always very dependable. He does a great performance in this. And again, it's difficult, isn't it? Because if you've got to do the Jekyll and Hyde thing and turn into the all that sort of stuff, it's difficult to not lapse into doing it in a bit cod. And I think he survives very well doing it. Actually, I think the two things are great. And again, as we said about prescient scripts, it's all about finding a source of energy that's sustainable, isn't it? And not sinking lots of money into dangerous and yes. Anyway, least said about that, the better, I think. That's essentially what the gist is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I can't believe you'd think that Mr. Chibnall might have borrowed elements of a previously great story to make his own script.
No, I can't think at all that he would ever have done that in any way, shape, or form. We get the first view of the TARDIS interior for quite some time as well. Slightly redesigned. First time we get to see it.
We've got rid of the wash basins.
But redesigned by Christine Rusco, because it's redesigned for Pyramids of Mars, and this is recorded after and shown first. So it's Roger, obviously a fantastic designer, but Christine is the one who's designed the new TARDIS here. But it's not being seen first on one of her stories. So shout out to both of them, because they're both lovely people and they're both very talented designers, and they're both in Phantom Events.
And of course, I'd forgotten. Of course, these were filmed out of sequence, weren't they? So you're right. We see it more. We do see it obviously in the next story, but it's nice to see an interior, because we'd had the whole of the previous season before where they were transmatting all over the place and not actually. We didn't actually have a TARDIS at all, really, did we? Until right towards the very end, beginning and the end, really. So good that we've got it. Although the exterior box is starting to look a little tatty now, isn't it?
I love Ewan Solon's performance in this. I think he's got a very quiet, commanding dignity about him. I think he does very well in this. Prentice kind of does what he does, doesn't he? I'm not going to be a hater here, but it's not a particularly nuanced thing. He starts mad and gets a bit madder. There isn't a progression, is there? You don't feel that he's in control of it or out of his depth and then goes mad. He's just a bit aggressive and mad, and then gets a little bit more aggressive and mad, and then dies, and we're all like, oh, good, And feel free to disagree with me if you do.
No, I honestly don't.
And we get another. It's another opportunity for Michael Wisher to come to our screens, but not in the way that we would associate him directly.
Is it his last acting sort of role in this?
No, he comes back for Wartime, the BBV spin-off, the real-time spin-off with John Levine, doesn't he? Can't forget Wartime. I can't forget it. Still can't forget.
You've tried to forget it.
I think it's his last Doctor Who, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Please don't make us review it.
Well, you're not, Jason. It'll be. Well, I like Wartime. It's 25 minutes on VHS.
It's the first time Jason's reviewed. What's the word? Relieved. Just if the lampshade's going to sit through that.
I don't know whether Jason's relieving himself as we speak. I don't know.
We should do a call out to the guy who actually plays the anti-man, because he didn't actually get credit, I don't think, in the Radio Times. And I've written his name down and I can't see it. It was
Shirley.
Mike Lee Lane.
Mike Lee Lane. Yes. who played the anti-man. I mean, it's not really much of a role, is it? It's just, but there are, I think, because the process they use, I think they use like wind machines as well to show that he was passing by things, you know, to make it look like there was something physical there. But yeah, he's when you've got the sort of red outline, that's him doing that role.
It's nice to see Graham Weston back after because he's in the War Games as well. He's a good go. Louis Mahoney is really good in this. He's got a very sort of assured presence on screen. It's a shame he's not in it a bit more. I feel like he could have had a bigger part in this. It's interesting because it's not a story I particularly gravitate to guessing out. Someone says to you, yeah. I mean, nobody ever says to me, do you want to watch Doctor Who? Sorry, nobody. I mean, if someone wants to phone me up and say it, I'm fine. But it's never one that I go, a little bit of Planet of Evil. But I think, and I was told this. I don't know if Jimmy watches these. But I was told this. Best time to watch Planet of Evil is at Christmas when you've got the Christmas tree, you've got the Christmas lights, all that stuff, and it's a bit. I think that's true. I think there are certain stories which suit different times of the year for watching. It's like drinking red wine or white. You know, there are seasons for it, aren't there? And you know, Battlefield, you should only really be watching in June, July. You should be as bright outside as it is on screen, kind of thing. Whereas this, it very much feels like it's a November, December story. You should be watching it when it's dark outside and it's dark, and then you have just the lights on it. It very much captures that feel.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that, and I think the whole season would fit well into this, particularly as you get further into this. And you know, we're coming up to, as we're recording this, we're coming up to Halloween, and of course everybody's looking to watch lots of horror type inspired programming. There's nothing better than sticking something like this or Pyramids of Mars or Brennan Morbius on, and it could quite easily be something that you would be saying this is fairly good October-November fare.
That's very true.
Thank you for holding me there.
That's very true. I'm sorry. This is a very horrific story. Lampshade agrees, Jason. Lampshade agrees.
Okay, I'm glad the lampshade is agreeing. I'm so glad I wore this shirt tonight.
The slight random thing that I like about this story as well is I like the effect of the guns. The guns have a physical effect on the gun, and then the light flash onto the sort of whatever, and the sound effect. Now the sound effects are Peter Howell, aren't they? Because it's not Dick. It's a very rare week off for Uncle Dick. I don't know whether he got on a cruise somewhere or whatever, but it's Peter Howell doing special sounds for this, isn't it? I love the gun sound, the effect of the thing, because you don't have any of that nonsense with lasers then, because there's always that awkward thing, isn't there, of quite lining it up. And I like their guns, is what I'm saying.
It's a strange story, because I agree in the fact that when I came to watching this, and this season has got so many strong stories that even what you would call a reasonably strong story is in danger of being nudged out, because there are some proper Goliaths in here, if you like. And this is a story that I sat and I watched it and I was like, have I actually seen this story before? I had, but not for quite some time. But I think, unfortunately, it's not because of the story itself. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the story, but because you've got such a memorable opener, and the story that's going to, coming next, and several others that are coming, I don't know. It's almost, there's a level where you would be like, yeah, that's a really good story, but the level in this season is like up here.
Are you feeling that it's slightly overshadowed?
I think it is. I think it is it's a nice, self-contained, straightforward story. It's got elements of horror. It's got lots of good things about it. It's got some great performances. But against some of the other stories, if you were to take it out, and put it with another season, you'd be like, oh, so I really like that story. I don't know. I might be being a little bit harsh, but the standard is so high in this season. I think it is in danger of being just nudged down slightly.
But on that very subject, this was Liz Sladen's favourite Doctor Who story that she appeared in. So I was a little bit surprised when she announced that on the commentary. Not in a horrible way, because there was that kind of thing of, you sort of think through all the ones that she is in, and you think, but she said that she really liked this because it was that moment of her and Tom having their adventures, and she felt that was the show, and they were, it was maybe sort of a combination of the story and also where she was at with it, because off out into space and a different location and all that kind of thing. Yeah, but no, this was Liz's favourite story apparently. Well, according to Liz herself. So I'm willing to take her word on it as the actual.
It's interesting, isn't it? You wonder what the impact would be if they had kept the original running order. If you'd gone from Zygons to Pyramid to this, whether you would, I obviously for Liz, she was in it, so but from a viewer's perspective, I wonder if it would have been any different.
I mean, we've talked quite a bit around this being Philip's sort of first season, if you like, where he's been able to commission and point the show. How much of an influence do we think Bob Holmes was having behind the scenes as script editor at this stage?
I think he was still having quite a bit. I mean, from what I read, it was a collaborative thing to come up with the theme. They wanted certain elements to be reflected in this story. I think it was Lewis Marks as well. They wanted there to be elements of, as I say, the Forbidden Planet, Jekyll and Hyde. I think there's some Shakespeare reference as well that's thrown in as for good measure. I can just imagine them sort of sat there going, right, what are we going to do? Let's have what about this? What about that? And I just think that it comes together so well. It comes, you can see the thought process around it being a darker show. A bit like we were saying for the previous episode, I wouldn't necessarily say there's much in here for kids, but there is definitely the adult layer on top of it. I think we're kind of getting to the let's give the kids a scare. So going back to what you were saying about watching this over sort of Halloween or the sort of darker months, let's give them a bit of a scare. And I think we've talked about later seasons where maybe they tip that scale just a little bit too far, and go completely the other side of that. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going to go with this, because I'm kind of like, it's a great story, but it's in with some massive hard hitters.
But surely you're scoring it on its own merit, rather than.
I am scoring it on its own. I'm scoring it on its own merit, but what I'm trying to explain is why I don't necessarily remember watching it, or because I have seen it when I rewatched it, I was like, yeah, I have seen this. But I think the things that stick in your memory, I haven't watched it recently. The things that stick in your memory are some of the other stories, some of the other elements of this series. I will score it on its merit, but I think as a story, it could be lost in amongst some of those.
No, I get what you're saying. I'm just saying in terms of if someone says to you Planet of Evil, you might go, Ugh. But as we do sort of story by story, I suppose that's the joy of being able to say, actually, I think this is near perfect. I'm going to give it 4. So you can appraise it sort of properly.
Yeah.
I mean, the Shakespeare thing's interesting because obviously there's the shades of, because Forbidden Planet's the Tempest and all that sort of stuff, isn't there? And he quotes Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet, doesn't he? And says he's met Shakespeare, as he indeed does later on again. It's funny because people always sort of throw these things up as being, it's continuity. He said he met. So you kind of think, well, do you not think sometimes he's just bragging? He's just because sometimes he could say I've met whoever, because the companion's going to be like, oh gosh, it's never say you're a liar, Doctor Who, are they?
But then 25 years later, there's a writer going, oh, I know. He said back in the 70s, I met Shakespeare. Oh, let's add that in.
Yeah, Shakespeare's way with words. It's one true voice once wisely sang. Do we have any top pop facts on Doctor Who and the Planet of Evil? Is it called the Planet of Fear originally? Have I made that up?
Ooh. Didn't have that on my...
Not on the pad.
Not on the pad. There's a couple of things. So talking about how it's not really for kids, Philip Hinchcliffe changed the original ending, which would have seen Sorensen die when he's thrown into the sort of antimatter pit. He wanted it to have a child-friendly ending. So don't worry about all the desiccated corpses. This guy lives at the end, so there's an uplifting end to the story for you. We were talking about the sets, and Jason, funny enough, you mentioned Ark in Space, because part of the set is from Ark in Space. The ship outer door is the Thow's ship from Planet of Daleks. And there's also bits of the mutant set in there as well. So you were talking about the layer, the height and the layers. So there's really thrifty on this one, where they recycled a lot of set. They probably put all the money in the jungle, and it shows because it is beautiful. But a lot of the set was recycled. You'll see in this that part 3 and part 4. The Doctor doesn't really have his scarf on because they were finding it difficult to do the special effects.
Oh, so the scarf continuity in this. In fact, the costume continuity in this is all over the place for Tom, all the way through it.
Anything which had the anti-men sort of thing in the background, or when he was by the pit, they got him to take his scarf off because it was affecting the visuals, and actually gets a change of costume. I think this is the last time he's in this particular setup of outfit. It changes slightly in the next one.
Actually, just going back to the Ark set that you were saying, parts of this was the Ark set. I think that was weren't those stories Roger Murray Leach as well, as I recall?
Well, these things would have just gone into stock, wouldn't they? Yeah. So you'd have just gone, I need a bit of a spaceship corridor, because I think some of it gets reused again for Robots of Death. So I guess some of it is a case of, Blake 7 need a space corridor. What have we got in I'll design so much of it, but if we just need a silver spaceship, just drag it out the scene docks. Does that conclude the televote there?
It does indeed, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, because I think obviously Philip and Robert are off on their, and we'll talk about it probably more for the next story, they're off on their influences from, Hammer horror and the like, and riffs on different classic Universal monsters and things like that. Mm-hmm. So, are we going to do scores of Doctor Who and the Planet of Evil?
Yeah. Shall I go first? Jason's nodding. It is a good story, and I'd like to say, I think it's in amongst some of these giants. It's a great story, and it's simple, but it is effective, and you can, even though weirdly, that if they'd been the other way around, you would have seen probably more of the Hammer horror sort of gothic elements being introduced into the next story. I think you can see that here. I think you can see those elements, and as you were just saying, I get the feeling it was like the two of them or the three of them sat down going, what do you really like? What do you think really people are going to want to watch? And they just pick elements from different stories, different genres, which I think is really good. And I did score this an 8. So I do like it. It's just when you're dealing with such a high quality season, there we go.
Okay.
Oh, I've been thinking about my scores quite a lot. Sorry, Scarrison. Sorry. My bad.
I thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I see where you're coming from, James. When we've said a couple of times through this now that this feels like it's a little bit overshadowed by what's around it, but it does stand on its own 2 feet really well. And again, it's the design, I think, that wins this story out. There's a really good sort of narrative into the story, but the design of that jungle and the suspense and the fear that comes through with the, you can't really see the monster. I think it's simply done. I think the antimatter monster, okay, they had some problems with it, but for me, I think it evokes quite an atmospheric appeal within the story. And I love the jungle design. I think there's not an awful lot wrong with this, in amongst, if up against Terror of the Zygons, this is standing on its own 2 feet really well. There are slightly better stories this season, but we are absolutely spoilt for choice as we come through it. I think everything's working well at this point in the season. Tom, Liz, again, I think you've got a reasonably good, strong guest cast list in this. There's lots going for it. James, you weren't wrong with your score, and I have also come in on Planet of Evil with a very solid 8.
I'm very pleased that you like it.
Oh, this lampshade's going to get a starring role, isn't it, during this season?
No, it's your replacement.
Oh, okay. I'm sure the viewer will be very pleased with the replacement.
I'm sure both of them will miss you. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I think it's good. I don't think it's amazing. I think it's above average. It's decent length and all that. It's fine, but I don't think it's. So I came in on Doctor Who and the Planet of Evil with a 7.
Good.
Yeah, which gives Doctor Who and the Doctor and the Planet of Evil 23 points.
Yay.
Which means it's not our season winner. That's the sad news. That's very part.
And I genuinely never thought it would be. But there's nothing that wrong with it.
Neither did I. Did you, James? Did you think it'd be the season winner?
I would have been very surprised if it had have been.
No surprises for anyone. And no surprises for anyone at home either, I hope. Right. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you, as always.
Yes, indeed. Thanks very much. Pleasure as always.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. Tell us what you think about the new member of the team. How excited you are. Oh, I really enjoy it. Follow me on Twitter. I'll answer your DM. a very fruity lampshade, isn't it? Gosh. Anyway, like, subscribe, follow, and we'll be back next week with part 2.